someone who's from the area who's made a huge impact on history. Some historians will say huge, terrible impact, perhaps. Is the 15th President of the United States, James Buchanan. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Oh, you're very welcome, and I appreciate being here. My career started here. As a young man in the year 1812, I came to Lebanon by urging of James Hopkins, the judge of Lancaster, who was my mentor, who sent me here to apply to be your assistant prosecutor. I think today you refer to it as a district attorney. So I became the district attorney of this newly established county called Lebanon County. There were too many lawyers in Lancaster.
Now, coincidentally, where your office was is now connected to the very group we're here to help them.
That's what I remember, that the Lebanon Historical Society's building is where I practiced as your district attorney. What you kindly paid me helped to pay for my law offices back on King Street in Lancaster, and really gave me the start that I needed toward a very illustrious career as a lawyer.
Before we get to your career later on, you had a connection to one of Lebanon County's most famous names, the Colemans. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, and yet I met them through Lancaster, actually. Mr. Coleman, who was quite the mining baron from the area, would move eventually to Lancaster, and through another young friend of mine at that time, whose father was the governor of Delaware, he was dating a young lady, I think that's what we refer to as escorting her, and her cousin was a young woman named Anna Coleman that I had the opportunity to meet, and I was enamored by her and remain so to this day. But her father didn't see things quite the same way that I saw them, and would break that engagement off.
Now, as the country's 15th president, do you ever feel like you're overshadowed by who was number 16? Abe Lincoln.
I believe today you refer to me as the last of the antebellum presidents. We were moral leaders. We thought of ourselves as figureheads of esteem to represent our country. The power, I believe, was in the legislature. The rule was they would send me the law and I would execute the law. My successor, Mr. Lincoln, would change that very much. He took presidential powers to a new head. But I did Mr. Lincoln a tremendous favor, I do believe, for I did not send him a war already in progress. And if there's one thing presidents hate to inherit, it's another president's war. So I believe I held it together well enough so that Mr. Lincoln could control that war from a northern perspective from the beginning. But my attempts at compromise and negotiation, diplomacy, were not looked upon fondly by those in the North or the South.
Now, with all due respect, history has ranked you as the worst president in the country's history. Is that fair?
Of course. I was the first president. No, I don't agree with that. I was the first president to write his memoirs. Mr. Buchanan on the eve of the rebellion, which is really why all presidents write memoirs, isn't it? To try to explain why things went the way they were. No, I don't believe I was the worst, but in retrospect, in hindsight, I believe it was the worst time. I was just returning from Great Britain, and I said the words, I'm quite happy now, and I'm quite prepared to retire to Wheatland with my reputation intact. All this ended a 40-year career in public service before becoming president. I believe the hope was, as a lifelong, as a diplomat, that possibly I could hold things together. That being a northern Democrat, which was unusual at that time, the power of the Democratic Party was in Virginia and the Carolinas, maybe the hope was that I could reach across. Honestly, my friends, we really didn't want to kill each other. And if there was a way around this, I think the hope was that I might be able to do that. But I'm afraid that snowball is too large.
We were talking beforehand, and if some things may have went differently during the Civil War, speaking of our area again, if Gettysburg had somehow turned out the other way and Robert E. Lee found a way to make his way to D.C. and Philadelphia, you would have been the last president of the United States of America.
Yes, and that frightens me beyond all belief. You see, my friends, when I was born, George Washington was president. And by the time I was inaugurated in 1856, 1857, I had literally lived the history of this country. And at one point I said, if this country is destined to fall apart, may I not live to see it? But I did live long enough to see our country go to war with itself, and live long enough to see us, what do you say today, duct taped back together. It's the best. But yes, had the Civil War gone a different direction, I indeed would have been the last president of the United States of America.
And that period in our history was perhaps the most divisive in our country's history. Fast forward now to what's about to take place on Tuesday. How do you compare the divisiveness that we've seen from the 1860s to today's politics?
It's not even close. Not even close. In my parlor at Wheatland, I have a lithograph showing the Compromise of 1850. That was one of the band-aids put on slavery, and it would bring California in as a free state, but would also establish the fugitive slave law. You know, you have this thing on your television called C-SPAN now, and I watch this curiously every once in a while, and I listen to the recent debates over health care and the issues surrounding immigration, which were issues in my time as well. And I look at this picture and I say to myself, if you think you're going through a rough time today, it's nothing compared to what we were dealing with. A certain Congress senator from Mississippi would become so agitated during the debate of the Compromise, he would pull a revolver out of his coat and point it at Senator Benton from Missouri, intending to shoot him dead right in the middle of the Senate chamber. A certain gentleman from Massachusetts was beaten near to death by another man with a cane over an insult, all surrounding the emotional topic of slavery. You have topics, I suspect, today that bring up much emotion, but I doubt very much it can come close to this, that would eventually tear our country in half.
If I didn't work for public radio, I would probably bring up that you were a bachelor your entire life. What was that? If I did work for public radio.
I probably would never have attained the offices that I attained had I married. I was very much in love with Anne. And had we married, I suspect my life might have taken a different turn. But the loss of Anne broke my heart, and my letter to her family as I wished to attend the funeral was sent back to me unopened. My first line in that letter is, "My heart lies in the grave." So I would live the rest of my life. There were other women that would come along, but none at any time that would lead to marriage. So I threw my life into my career.
And if folks were to visit Wheatland today, what would they see? What would they get to learn about your legacy?
Well, I don't know what they would learn about my legacy other than I suspect one would call it a Greek tragedy. If my career had ended after returning home from Great Britain, I suspect there would be a very different attitude toward me. You see, there has never been anyone before me, and I doubt there will ever be anyone again after me who will attain the resume that I had before walking into the White House. I was congressman, I was senator, I was ambassador to Russia and sealed the first trade deals with the Russian Empire. I was Secretary of State under President Polk, and would be so during the Mexican War, and would negotiate the 49th parallel, which would give us the northwestern border of our country that almost led to a third war with Great Britain. So I served my country very well, and had I ended it as ambassador to Great Britain, minister to the Court of St. James, I suspect history would treat me a bit differently today.
Mr. President, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for having me this evening.